It's 2 minutes past the hour, so we're going to dive on in. So welcome, everyone. Happy solstice. My name's Julie Quiros, and I am with Movement Strategy Center. And it is just a wonderful, wonderful pleasure to moderate this conversation. And I love this panel. I'm so excited to hear from them and to have a great conversation with you all. Let me give just a little bit of background before we get started. As you all know, this is called Love in a Time of Violence, because we are in a time of violence, of incredible violence. And as you know, this is part of our campaign, which we've called Lead with Love. And Lead with Love is a pledge to take bold action grounded in love. But it's not always easy to know what that means. And we know that it doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean compromise of values. But what does it mean? It can mean some tough choices. And so we have some amazing speakers today who can speak from their experience and their wisdom about really navigating what leading with love means. And I also wanted to give a little bit of background about where Lead with Love came from. And it sort of has three important origins at Movement Strategy Center. And one is that Movement Strategy Center, along with so many other people, we really understand that the big picture of where we are as a country and as a planet right now is we are in a transition from a world of domination and extraction to a world of interdependence and regeneration and resilience. And everything we're doing, every single issue that we're working on is within that context. And the more that we understand that, the more strategic we can be in moving towards the world that we want. The second big theme with Movement Strategy Center, and again, all of us, so many of us out there, is that we recognize and we understand that we actually have to embody the world that we want right now. The revolution doesn't start later on. The revolution starts right now with this breath, with every interaction that we have. And the future is not somewhere in the distance. The future is embodied in us. The future is emerging within us. And how do we bring those practices forward? And then last, the Lead with Love also, it wasn't just like an online thing. It actually reflects over the past few years, over 100 people have joined MSC in what we called Transitions Labs, where we've actually practiced the qualities of embodying the future and the strategy of navigating strategically in a time of great unknown. And like I said, over 100 people have gone through those, and that's sort of a community of folks who, after the election, felt like we really wanted to have a larger collective voice in our movements. And so Lead with Love went online as a voice of actual people who cut across a whole bunch of different movements. For every movement you can think of, there's someone represented in there. And these are folks who want to show up in a different way and really want to bring the most innovative, most powerful presence that they can to the work that we're doing. So that's the background on what Lead with Love is. And it's exciting. This is our first Lead with Love video conference. So today we have three amazing panelists. And like I said, I love this panel and I love everything that they are and everything that they're going to talk about. And let me just introduce them to you. We have three people who are going to talk about the question that we posed, which was, how do we lead with love when we're being attacked? Because we are literally physically, emotionally, culturally, in every way being attacked. And leading with love in that can almost sound like a contradiction. And to guide our conversation today, the folks who have so generously agreed to join us are Judith Leblanc, who is the director of the Native Organizers Alliance. And she is a member of the Caddo tribe and her guilty pleasure is fry bread.
Yes.
We also have Fahd Ahmed, who is the director of Drum, and the acronym means Desis Rising Up and Moving, which organizes working class people of South Asian descent for immigrant, worker, racial, educational, gender, and global justice. So welcome, Fahd. And then our third speaker is Adrienne Marie Brown, who is a writer, social justice facilitator, emergent strategist, pleasure activist, and doula living in Detroit. So that is our lineup. And before we get started, let me just say a couple things about logistics. As I said, you are muted right now, just because we have so many people on. It's kind of hard to talk over each other. And I've asked everyone to click on the chat icon so that you can see the chat function, and you can raise questions, you can comment, you can shout out to friends, whatever you want to do with the chat function. And you can also put a question as someone's talking. So we're going to go through the three panelists, and then we're going to open it up for questions. If you would like to ask a question while it's still on your mind, you can type it in there and we will ask it. We'll come back to it when we have a discussion. You can also let us know, say, I'm going to want to have a question, and we'll try to find you when we open up the discussion. And when we have the discussion, when we do open up for discussion, we'll either read your question from the chat, or we'll try to unmute you and let you talk. And hopefully the technology will all work out on that perfectly. So that's the plan. So, and also one last thing is that we are recording this session. A lot of people, because we put it together pretty quickly, asked if it could be recorded because they couldn't actually make this time. So it will be available. We'll put it on probably YouTube, the MSC YouTube channel, and the MSC website. So without further ado, let's get started. And if we could unmute Judith, please. Are you out there, Judith, somewhere?
Good afternoon, Julie, Fahd, and Adrienne.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. So, Judith, I know that you just came, you have worked your whole life with Native communities, and you yourself come from a Native community, and that has been core to your organizing throughout your life. I also know that you recently came back from Standing Rock, and we have all been watching and inspired and concerned and supportive of everything that's happened at Standing Rock and continues to unfold. In our conversation a couple days ago, you told me that at Standing Rock, there was a lot of discussion about how to deal with the violence that was coming at you, and that you had to go through a process of reestablishing ways of being organized, of communicating, and just plain old ways of being. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, and I have to say that I'm one of those Indian women who walk with one high heel and one moccasin on the other foot. I've been very lucky in my organizing life to have worked with the labor movement, in independent media, and in the peace movement. And so I bring, I think, a unique perspective to organizing in Indian country. And organizing in Indian country is a lot like in other communities of color or in the labor movement, but then it is very different because of our very unique relationship to Mother Earth, and because of the cultures that we have that define our origin stories. Sorry, I have a Standing Rock cough. There's a lot of us who've left there who have this cough that doesn't seem to go away. Sorry. So, I think the starting point is that from the very beginning, we were called protectors, not protesters. that in fact we were drawn to this place, to Standing Rock, to protect sacred sites and to protect the water, not only for Standing Rock Sioux tribe, but for the 17 million people who live along the river, the Missouri River. And in many ways, in a culture and a heightened atmosphere of hatred and violence, it really was an amazing experience over a number of months to see how we had to struggle amongst ourselves and with our allies for remaining in a state of faith, remaining in a state of belief that we are right and they are wrong, and that we together are stronger and can withstand rubber bullets and water cannons and sound concussion grenades. And part of that was people were really open to the idea that not only are we stronger together, but that we needed to be guided by sacred and traditional teachings. And it's not like people on the ground at Standing Rock wanted to go back to the 1700s, but rather that we could see through the teachings and the leadership of the Osheti elders that, in fact, that the wisdom that kept our people together even at the worst of times could be utilized as a guide for action in the 21st century.
That's great. You talked about, when you and I had a chance to talk, you talked about the fact that there were a lot of vets, a lot of war vets were there, and that there's a over-concentration of vets, that Native people are concentrated, and that there was a lot of people actually brought a lot of trauma to Standing Rock. Can you talk about that, and about both about the vets and about where that led in terms of the youth response?
Well, American Indians have a very high percentage due to the poverty draft, and because of our relationship to our country, we have a very high percentage of folks who volunteer to be in the military services. During the initial invasion of Iraq, for example, there were 10% of the boots on the ground were Native. We're, less than 2% of the population. And so on top of the historic trauma that colonialism and genocide has brought upon a whole people, the most recent experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan, many of our vets who were there, who were ready to stand with Standing Rock, were people who are recovering from the ravages of wars in other countries. And Standing Rock, the Osheti camp, very much was like a war zone, feeling like a war zone. Low planes flying overhead, helicopters, drones. In the last month and a half or two, big, huge spotlights at night shining into the camp to keep an eye on us. And that did create a lot of kind of PTSD responses to aggression. And what was powerful to see is the impact of ceremony, of how our elders conducted ceremony in order to help people gain a sense of well-being, a sense of being centered in prayer. And for many of the vets who came who were non-Native, who came in the last couple of weeks, it was a very powerful and important struggle between, is love a weakness? Is being in prayer and being motivated by faith a sign of weakness, or is it in fact a sign of strength? And I think that the young people who were there, the International Indigenous Youth Council, they really grappled with this issue because they feel the sense of responsibility that they are becoming our leaders, and that through this experience of standing up and really fighting in the 21st century sense required an understanding of, you can't fight violence with violence. You can't fight hatred with hate. There was a very powerful video that was done of a 10-year-old who was going to the school that was established in the camp. And one of the things that this young man says from Standing Rock, he says, you know, we can't fight with our hands. We have to fight with our spirits. Fighting with our hands is the old way. And it really, in so many ways, captured how it is that the International Indigenous Youth Council conducted themselves after the terrible aggression and the violence perpetrated by the pipeline company and the Morton County Sheriffs and the National Guard. There was ceremony, water was blessed, and it was decided that they would lead a march to the barricade, and that they would go there in the spirit of peace, that they would go there in the spirit of prayer, and that they would pray for the humanity of those who were being used against us, who were committing the violence in the name of the pipeline company and the far right in the state of North Dakota. And it was scary. It was a scary thing to do because no one was sure what the reaction would be from the sheriffs and the National Guard. And so they went to the front line, they knelt in prayer, and they offered the water to the sheriffs and the National Guard. And there were a few, who took that water and blessed themselves. What is the power of that? Well, the power is that these young people were praying for the humanity of these soldiers and these sheriffs, trying to reach them, to help them understand that what we were doing in Hosheti-Shikon was to save the water, not just for the tribe, but for 17 million people along that river, and for the good of Mother Earth. And for those who participated, the idea that love, that prayer, that faith in the path that our ancestors have laid before us to save the planet from destruction from fossil fuels, that's a powerful thing to act on your faith, on your beliefs, on your origin stories. But on the flip side, who knows what impact it will have had on those sheriffs and National Guardsmen. We do know that in so many ways, this fight is going to be won with the power of our faith. This legal fight will be won for environmental impact study by the power of the faith of all of our allies and the continued pressure for divestment from the pipeline company and the continued pressure on the Corps of Engineers to do a full environmental impact study. And so in so many ways, we've had to relearn what our elders knew from the beginning. And many of us, although I'm an AIM generation person, I'm in my 60s, I too had to personally grapple with why it is enough for a political organization. It is at the core, not enough, but it's at the core of what organizing is. Love and faith and belief in our righteousness is a driving force, not anger, not retaliation.
Thank you. I want to ask you one last question. What sort of parallels or lessons do you have for communities outside of Native communities? Sometimes people can think these are sort of unique issues to Native communities. How do you respond to that?
I think the political moment we're in and the state of Mother Earth, we have to build community where we live. We have to build community where we work. There's such great dangers and perils that we face as peoples, and in many ways, you have to find that sacredness in your community and build community around that. I live in East Hallam, and here we are in a battle around the impact of gentrification. And those who are joining the struggle to protect our community and to ensure that the history is respected and that the people who've lived here for generations can continue to live here. You have to have an understanding of the history of this place, East Hallam, the great struggles for civil rights, for the right of Puerto Rican independence. You have to believe in the sacredness of community, and that this community is not simply a sacred place for Puerto Ricans, but it holds a sacred place for all who live here, and that we have to lift up the history, and we have to protect the rights of working class families who live here. So it's a matter of finding the sacredness in community.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judith. And I know there's going to be a lot of questions. I'm already seeing them when we come back to the question and answer time, but thank you so much. Let's hold within us that sacredness of community. We're going to move now to our second speaker, who is Fahd Ahmed. So we're going to put Judith on mute, and we're going to bring Fahd off mute so that we can move to our next speaker. Can you help me with that, Vicente?
I think I'm unmuted.
Okay, you're unmuted. Great. And you can mute yourself, Judith. So welcome, Fahd. It's wonderful to have you here. I think you're out in Texas or something. Is that right?
Yeah, visiting family in Texas.
Wonderful, wonderful. Sacred community. So one of the things that a lot of folks say is that this present moment, which is so violent and so ugly, is a moment of reality being revealed. It is reality being revealed. And that we know when we can see reality, that we have the opportunity to be more strategic than when we are deluded and when we can't see. And we see this a lot in the No Muslim Registry effort that you and others are leading, where the existing discriminatory registry is revealed to be the basis that set the stage for the moment that we're in. Can you tell us about drum's resistance and resilience, the deep roots of it since 9/11?
Thank you for having me on this conversation. I'm glad to see so many folks on here right at the time of holidays. Drum is a 16-year-old organization, and we organize working class people of South Asian descent. And their organization existed before 9/11, but was an all-volunteer sort of formation at that time. And the day after 9/11, we shifted to being maybe like 4 or 5 full-time volunteers, almost for up to a year before we were actually able to sort of get some resources to have staff. And the reason for that massive shift was immediately 2 days after 9/11, there started to be massive sweeps in our neighborhoods. Police, immigration, FBI would show up to people's homes, to their workplaces, confront people on the street. And we started getting phone calls from families. We'd created this hotline number saying, my father left for work 3 days ago, he hasn't come home. Police came to our house last night, they took my brother away, we don't know where he is. A black van just pulled up on the street, grabbed 4 guys off the street and drove off. And those at least 1,200 men that were picked up in the New York, New Jersey area, held incommunicado from their families, from attorneys for anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. And we were able to find them in county jails in New Jersey and started to work with them. But as a issue, like these mass disappearances of people went largely unnoticed. There's a few folks within our movements that kind of stood with us, but by and large, it was left unnoticed. A year after 9/11, there was the Special Registrations Program, which required men from Muslim countries to register with the government, men of all faiths. And 83,000 men registered, and 13,000 of them were put into deportation proceedings. And again, I think by that time, the support within the movement had grown a little bit more, but in terms of like broader society, you know, right now people are talking about Muslim registries, like that sounds horrendous. How could that happen? It's like, actually, it just happened like 14 years ago, and people really didn't take notice. And, you know, like all of these sweeps, these registrations, there was other smaller programs that really produced 0 leads for anything related to any sort of violence or terrorism. And by 2002 and 3, you know, there was some attention, a little bit in the media and a little bit kind of within the agencies, that all these people are being picked up and yet no results are being produced. And so it's at that time that we started to see that the agencies started to shift and engage in community relations and really use community relations as a way to infiltrate our communities. And through that infiltration, they created a surveillance network and apparatus of undercover officers, informants, who were spying on all aspects of our communities and our daily lives. And even when they have failed to sort of produce real results, they have resorted to manufacturing fake terrorism cases. So finding people with mental health issues, people with financial problems, substance abuse problems, and really inciting them to say things. And once they say those things, they arrest those people. And so, you know, a lot of sort of the rhetoric that's being talked about, and then, you know, sort of at least the surveillance policies were continued within the Obama administration. A lot of the rhetoric that came up around the Trump campaign and since the election, a lot of it's for us has, well, yes, there is an escalation in a way that is alarming, but there's also a recognition that a lot of these things have happened before, not only to our communities in the last 14, 15 years, but like our country has a legacy of, you know, trying to register people, put people in detention camps, surveillance of people, the genocide of people. And I think we're trying to reference some of that history to engage, you know, there's a wider range of people that are now being engaged and like worried about what this current moment means. And so it's an opportunity to welcome them into the movements, provide some context, provide some background and education, and then really reorient people around like how do we relate to each other as individuals, as communities, and what binds us together. And, you know, I think as activists, as organizers, you know, oftentimes we're very good at being able to talk about what we stand against. It's, I think in this moment, over the last couple of years, we've been thinking about it, and I do think that this seems to be happening increasingly across the movement, obviously indicated with the slogan "Lead with Love," is what do we stand for? What binds us together? And I think it's really around thinking around like, okay, how do we love our own communities? And it's that love that encourages us to protect them and like protect each other. How do we love across our communities? That really, and there's different ways that we get separated from each other, but like how do we kind of bring love into our relationships with each other at the very grassroots level where it's really needed. So everyday people really building across communities. And then also even in confronting, you know, people that we're up against, or at least sections of the people that we're up against, how do we, you know, at least have love guide? I think like we're still struggling with like sort of like, you know, treating the aggressor with love, but like I think at least having love guide our relationship or our approach to them. Always sort of, you know, presenting paths of ways like, look, you have options, and this is an option that you could take instead of the one that you're on. And I think that's really sort of a lot of the thinking that is informed by our history of struggle and work over the last 16 years. But it's really kind of, I think, leading us around the way forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Could you tell us about, you talked a lot when you and I got to speak about the sort of deep community that you're building through the hate-free zones and also through the work with the No Muslim Registry, that is Again, not simply a national platform, but something with deep roots. Could you describe both of those efforts?
Yeah, I'll speak more on the hate-free zone. I think, there is an assessment that in this period, I mean, we are seeing, while talking about love, like I don't want to minimize the fact that we are seeing white supremacists, Islamophobes, misogynists, homophobes, transphobes, racists, all forms of bigots that are not only sort of like socially unleashed, but are actually being appointed to positions of power in the incoming administration. And so, a practical assessment means that it becomes very difficult for us to be able to engage in affirmative or positive policy changes on the federal level. And it also means that we do have to figure out real ways of how do we defend our communities. I think it was, I forget if it was you in the introduction or Judith, that talked about like literally like physical defense, like people's safety, people's lives, people's livelihoods will be at stake. And so how do we protect our people? And, there's been some conversation around sanctuary cities, the sanctuary movement, and which particularly tends to issues of immigrant communities. I think we've been cognizant that the sanctuary city has limitations. It limits a little bit about what the police and city agencies, what information they can turn over. But it doesn't stop federal agencies from doing whatever they want, like from coming into our neighborhood and doing a raid. It doesn't stop hate groups from coming into our neighborhoods and trying to start things. And so how do we sort of create the infrastructure to be able to defend our communities, but do it in a way that allows us to really build across communities and also to be able to fight back? And so we launched our initiative for the Hate-Free Zone campaign on December 2nd. The idea is to really build neighborhood-based defense networks and systems, on an individual level, providing trainings on self-defense, on bystander interventions for our community members, on an individual basis. Then there's sort of community defense, anti-raids response networks, cop watch patrols, but also playing with the idea of community defense patrols that allow us to really like sort of tell people like, how are we going to defend our community? Are you interested in defending the community? Are you interested in defending your block? And providing people the trainings on knowing how to do that. And then like building a network across. And then I think there's also a thinking around in this moment, while we're setting up a defense network, how do we also create some infrastructure to be able to fight back? And there's some lessons that we've drawn from the immigrant rights movement in 2001, 2006, 2008, and 2009, where we saw there was, because of the anti-immigrant policies, there was actually a contradiction being created between some segments of capitalists, largely small to medium-sized businesses, and the government. And so is there a way that we can replicate that contradiction? So can we get businesses to be a part of the hate-free zone, and then they contact the Chamber of Commerce, they contact the bank that provides them their loans, and kind of figure out what are ways that we can, engage people. Businesses are they're gonna lose their workers and they're gonna lose their customers in many of our communities and many of our neighborhoods. And I think the couple of principles that are guiding this is like, how do we build these hate-free zones that they're inclusive of all of our communities? And so in our neighborhood of Jackson Heights, it's probably the most diverse neighborhood in the country. The hate-free zone consists of Filipinos, of South Asians, of Muslims, of Latino folks, immigrants, queer folks, Southeast Asian folks, because that's the makeup of the neighborhood. But then like sort of what would it mean to have a hate-free zone in a Black neighborhood? So maybe you don't need a anti-raids defense network, but we do need more cop watch programs. And, sort of the defense systems are not only watching for police, but in our neighborhood as well, also watching for street harassment of women or harassment of queer folks. And so it's really around like, how do we kind of build together? And so the framework that we've been using is a hate-free zone is a description of kind of the space. But then like sort of the subheading of it is love and protect each other. And so how do we start to build communities in new ways? What would it look like if, the anti-raids defense was multi-ethnic? If the community patrols was Filipinos, South Asians, Black folks patrolling the neighborhood together? What impact would that have on our own communities that view that, oh, these are the people that are protecting us? And really to figure out like, how do we win people over? I think oftentimes we are more concerned about sort of being right and winning the argument, but really around how do we win people over? And I think as Judith was mentioning, the struggle at Standing Rock, I think has been one of the most powerful examples to demonstrate that ethos is how do we confront people, but always sort of like leave open paths for them to be won over and to be brought over to our sides.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, love and protect each other and win people over. Those are the big themes and questions for our time. So we're gonna go on to our third speaker now. And so we're gonna put you, Fahd, on mute, and we're gonna call forth Adrienne Marie Brown. I don't think you're on mute anymore. Let me see. Okay, you're off mute. Hey, there she is. Welcome, Adrienne.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello. I love your matching glasses and headset.
You too can have all of this.
So, Adrienne, you recently wrote, you write so many powerful things, but one thing you wrote that was really striking recently, you wrote, grief and fear and anger are sane responses to fascism and can be great teachers. Can you tell us what you meant by that?
Yeah, I think that part of what I've seen happen over the past few years, most of my adult life, but when things happen that really scare us or that cause us great grief, I think there's a way, particularly for organizers, that we will try to push that down and be like, I'm not scared, we're fighting back. There's no time to mourn, get out there and fight, and there's no time to actually feel the very logical feelings that we are having. And I like to think of those feelings as data. Like fear to me is my body sending a signal up the chain that's like, you need to pay attention, you need to be more vigilant, you need to be more aware as an individual, as a community. And feeling grief for, even feeling grief for something complex. Like, right now, I think a lot of us are feeling grief, even though I would say probably most of us in our movements are post-nationalist or, we have serious critiques of the US experiment. And yet when the normalization of it gets challenged and it's like, oh, now it's really going to be chaos, and all of a sudden we're feeling grief even for the oppression we just had last week, because the new oppression is like even scarier. So I feel like there's a way that we try to deny that full range of emotion and the data that comes from that full range of emotion. And I think if we ignore it and try to just keep on pressing on without taking time to say, like, I'm grieving or I'm feeling this way, it mutes our capacity to actually tell what's happening to us. And so I think that's where you end up with something where people are like, the alt-right. And it's like, there's no such thing as the alt-right. There is a white supremacist and fascist front that's all over the entire globe that's happening. But I feel like even that kind of language pulls out what might cause emotion. Alt-right doesn't really mean anything. But I feel like when we're actually feeling the emotion, it's like, well, if you ask me what I'm scared of white supremacists being in charge of the entire world. And I want to know exactly what I'm scared of so that I can appropriately organize myself and organize my community to be able to respond to it. And I recently got to spend some time in the papers of Ursula Le Guin. And in a court, she's a science fiction writer, amazing feminist science fiction writer. And she wrote this letter and she said, people who don't acknowledge their sadness end up killing something. And I thought that was like you know, just like, exactly, like, this is what happens is if we don't take the time to stay in contact with our humanity, which is that part of us, you know, and even not even our humanity, I think it's bigger than that, our sentience, you know, that part of ourselves that's like, I am alive on this planet and I have this range of emotion. If we lose contact with that, then I think we've already lost whatever it is that we were fighting for anyway. And I feel like being able to stay in contact with that is like, oh, I feel sadness. My opposition also feels some sadness. I feel fear. My opposition feels fear. Those are the common traits of our aliveness. And if we can stay in touch with those common traits, I think then we can, you know, evolve beyond I love what you said, Fahd, like evolve beyond that win-lose paradigm where it's like I have to constantly be winning and topping you and besting you. And it's like we all lose over and over again in that paradigm. But if there's a paradigm where it's like we all grieve and we all fear and we all long for connection and we long to belong, then we start to move into a category of togetherness. And I think that's the only way we're going to make it forward. So that's the sanity for me.
Can you tell us about, you had a really deep moment the day after the election where you called, where people came together in Detroit to talk about resilience and grief.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love Detroit. You know, I moved here I moved to Detroit in 2009. Right now I'm at my best friend's house and visiting the baby. So if you see me like looking off, going like that, it's the baby. But yeah, I live in Detroit and I've been holding a local practice group there for generative somatics, which is a practice that's really about integrating personal and social transformation and really organizing ourselves around what we long for and really listening to our bodies, learning to listen to our bodies and do that. So I have a local practice group I've been organizing in Detroit, and we happened to have scheduled our session for the day after the election. And I woke up that morning crying and then like questioning myself for crying, like, you don't even believe in all this, like, what are you crying about? And still feeling terrified and like, did my white family vote for him? You know, just like going through all this stuff and spent some time with the baby and was just like, how are we going to move forward? And we came together in Detroit and we focused on two things. First, we said, what are we scared of? And we just got it out. Like we turned and faced each other, got face to face, really let ourselves just say all the things, which was really important to be able to name like not just the surface level of what we're scared of, but really getting deeper and deeper and deeper to that place where it's just like, do I belong on this planet? You know, do I belong to a community? Will anyone stand and protect me? Does it make sense to keep bringing children into this world? You know, is the human experiment worthwhile? I mean, like the really bigger, deeper things. And just let it be. Like we understood that like none of us have the answers. These are the questions we don't have answers for. We know that we can feel into our best experiment, and we can keep trying to make a case for our existence. And so we let those questions out, and there was a lot of emotion that came forward, and you could feel like the room just kind of let ourselves move up like a volcano, just like all this stuff needs to move out of us. And then we focused on resilience, and not in the way I think it gets used a lot, which is just like, hey, bounce back, get it together, we gotta go. But really that like, what is it in you that has the capacity to recover from harm, and not to rush through that experience, but say, I know how to make myself whole again. And what we found in the room was two things. One, that almost all of us have something in nature, one or more things in nature that we can draw on that give us strength beyond just our human experience. So whether it's the ocean, or for me, it's the ocean. I'm always just like, there's a big ocean inside me. I'm vast. I have room for all this. You know, but other people, it was like trees, birds. You know, watching the way that animals in nature take care of their children. There were ways that came through. And then the other thing was, we can't do it alone. Like resilience is not an individual, isolated, lonely task to figure out how to bounce back. And actually, that seems to counter what's possible. Instead, it's like resilience comes from, you know, moving in to deeper intimacy with those around us and being able to say, I really need your support. I need interdependence. I need to lean on you. And I was so grateful that we were in this room in Detroit, and we moved all the way to laughter, which if anyone had told me when I woke up on November 9th that I would be with a bunch of Black and brown and white people in Detroit laughing and singing, you know, and that's exactly what we went to. It's just like, actually, we're still very much alive. We're still very much loving each other. And there's a lot of goodness here. Like there's so much goodness in this room. And we just have to focus, like what you pay attention to grows. We have to focus on this goodness. Yeah. A lot of these systems have been failing us for so long. And I think that's where, like, looking at Black and brown people, wait, we've been on the short end of the stick of this country for such a long time. How do we leverage this moment to really fully expose what a mess we have and like what else is possible, that some other loving thing is possible?
Great. Thank you. And that always, always such great wisdom that what you focus on will grow. So what?
That's why I keep telling people, I'm like, stop posting every stupid thing that he does. He's going to be an idiot for 4 years. It's going to be appalling for 4 years. Stop being apoplectic and spending all of our days on that. We really have so much else to pay attention to. Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we actually, like, mindfully say, like, I see that headline, I'm going to let it pass. And, like, what is the work I want to uplift that is a response to it? Like, how do we start to do that move of, like, you know, oh, this piece of policy is here's this community organization that I know is responding to it really well. Let's donate there right now. You know, like, I really want us to get good at that move.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So how do we strategically focus and with agility as well? Thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for your amazing comments and thoughts and wisdom. I want to unmute all three of you, Judith and Ahmed and Adrienne, and invite, we have about 10 minutes left. And if there are questions or comments from folks who've been listening, if you could just put it in chat, I can either call on you or I can read your question. Let me start by saying that I know there was an interesting conversation going on in chat. Brenda lifted up the question about to Ahmed about how about calling the hate-free zones love-full zones, and Ahmed, you responded. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about the choice of your wording?
Yeah, you know, I think that was actually one of the first things that came to our mind is, you know, how do we, you know, as I mentioned, this thinking around what do we stand for? But we also did some testing with our folks, with our own members, with workers that work in the businesses in our neighborhood, with the businesses, as well as allies from other targeted communities, as well as, I think, you know, from more privileged communities in the neighborhood. And I think people felt that the hate-free zone was a little bit more clear. Because it would allow us to, like, sort of more so name, like, the people that were being excluded and being marginalized. And then I think, you know, it is also a unique moment, or maybe not so unique. There is, within the white supremacists that are coming to power, there is actually a portion of them that actually also have been using the language of love, sort of as just kind of love for our people, and they're defining white people very clearly as white people. And so I think we kind of figured out, through the testing, we figured out how to combine both of those. And so it's hate-free zone, colon, semicolon, I forget which one the two dots is, love and protect each other. And I think that sort of allows us to, like, sort of both be able to articulate kind of what we're against, so that it can't be co-opted. I think, you know, I think we're thinking on, like, how can it be co-opted? So, like, love-free zones, I mean, I grew up in Oklahoma, and, like, you know, there were places where they talked about, like, oh, you know, this is a very strong, loving community, but the way they defined community was automatically exclusionary of other people. And so it's like around hate-free zone, love and protect each other, I think allows us to attend to both things on both ends.
Thank you. I know I have a bunch of questions, but I'm looking to see if there are any questions coming from folks in the audience. Folks who have been listening. If you're on mute, you can type in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead with my question then.
Okay.
Fahd, you talked, when we talked the other day, I thought you had a really helpful framework for thinking about transformative solidarity. And solidarity, I mean, so many communities are being attacked right now that the question of how we work together and be in solidarity is really important. Could you share what your framework for transformative solidarity is?
Yes. So I think, solidarity is a very commonly used term in our movements. And we've been thinking a lot about sort of, okay, what does solidarity mean? Is all types of solidarity the same? And I think the way we've kind of broken it down is sort of looking at 4 levels. And we don't mean levels to be like sort of judgmental or dismissive of like sort of the first levels, but I think it's just really kind of getting us to think deeper around like sort of what's actually happening through the process of solidarity. So the first level, I think, is just like expressing solidarity. I think that's what I can do on this call, what we do at panels, which is, let's say I stand in solidarity with Standing Rock. It's easy for me to say that, and like saying it is important. It's taking a position. It gets people to think, and that's important. But that's like sort of the first aspect of it. The second is we actually sort of get physically involved. But we get physically involved because we have a very transactional relationship with each other. And so we call that transactional solidarity, which is, I'm going to go to Standing Rock, and I hope that, kind of when the Muslim registries come, that, the people from Standing Rock and people from indigenous communities will stand with us. And obviously that's important. That's kind of how relationships get built. Like when you don't have relationships, like there has to be some starting point. And sometimes, that's kind of where just relationships have to start. A third one is, I think we're kind of thinking, maybe using the term manifested solidarity, but I think this still needs to be played with, is when people actually start putting their bodies on the line. And so let's say if I go to Standing Rock and under the leadership of the folks that are leading the struggle in Standing Rock, like sort of, putting myself in front of bulldozers or blocking the police from accessing, being able to get to the water protectors, like actually physically putting our bodies on the line. And I think this is actually the one that our movement sort of recognize and emphasize the most. It's very visually, it's very stimulating. It's very sort of tangible, and it appeals to people in a very immediate way. And it is very, very important. But I think there's a 4th level of solidarity, which I think our movements undervalue. And I think that's really around the 2 differences there are is who's doing the solidarity and what they're doing with it. And so the 3rd level, the manifested, is often like let's say the quote unquote, the badass activists. The 4th level is when impacted people, marginalized people, reframe, reshape their own struggles to be in line with the struggles of other communities. And so I know I've been using the example of Standing Rock. I don't have a concrete one on that one yet, but in the immigrant rights struggle, our members who are undocumented, who have been undocumented from anywhere from 5 years to 25 years, when they say that we will not accept any form of immigration reform, even though we end up qualifying from it, we will not accept it if it means the militarization of the border, or if it means a further criminalization of other immigrant communities. that form of like saying, you know what, I will forego benefits or the important things for my own struggle to be in line with the struggles of other folks. So maybe, for example, you know, I talked about like engaging businesses. What would happen if the businesses in our neighborhoods, as they're going to talk to the banks, also started asking questions about Standing Rock? An issue that they on a day-to-day basis don't have a connection with. But these people who are themselves under attack say that actually, as banks, we need you to not only take a stance against these anti-immigrant policies, but also we need you to like sort of divest from these pipelines that you all are working on. What would that mean? And I think the point that we're trying to highlight there is that the real contradictions are actually not amongst the people that are, let's say, on this call, amongst those of us that are activists or those of us that are organizers. The contradictions are often within our everyday communities who may not have contact with people in other communities and really don't see the commonality of their struggles on a day-to-day basis. And it's by sort of foregoing my short-term interest, our short-term interest, for the purpose of building long-term alignment, that we start to undo those contradictions that exist across our communities. And that process is very transformational. I mean, I think I've seen like when, you know, people, you know, Black immigrant members from Families for Freedom hear from us that like, oh, we're not supporting this particular bill, even though it actually benefits our members, like they'll come to us crying or like being like, oh my God, I never thought that this was possible. And there's a transformation that takes place there, which can't be, which is just far beyond measure.
Thank you.
I really want to plus on what Fahd is saying, because at Standing Rock, we had the phenomena at a certain point in mid-October where there were probably 700 or 800 people left in the camp from a high of about 10,000. And in the camp, it became a majority white. It was like Burning Man or Woodstock. And it was really, really a problem in the sense of disrespect for Native leadership, understanding of culture and how to conduct business in the camp. And so I think that the way that I began to look at it is very much along that step 4 of solidarity, that number one, Standing Rock is everywhere. I mean, water problems everywhere. It was a Flint moment. Now we've lifted up, it's a Standing Rock movement, but water is sacred. Water, access to clean water is a human right. And so connecting with water issues is an act of solidarity by lifting up Flint and Standing Rock. Another example is that we have to think about organizing at a time of violence and the emboldened right wing about growing the movement asymmetrically, meaning that we have to build among those we have relationships with to lift up whatever the key link is between what we're struggling in our community or the organization that we work with, what our priority is, and link it to something that has bubbled to the top and really caught in the imagination and the attention of a broad cross-section of people. So for example, sometimes things that bubble to the top are not in our own individual self-interest, and we have to have a conversation about why it's in the self-interest of the we, of the broader collective. So for example, Tohono O'odham tribe in Arizona, they had a struggle within the tribe about whether or not to bring some sacred objects to Standing Rock back in September, because it was not a tradition of the Tohono O'odham to take their own traditional things and to take it outside their nation. That had never been done. And there was a struggle within the community. And because of the importance of what was going on in Standing Rock and the stand for tribal sovereignty and the fight to protect Mother Earth, they went. There was an agreement and there was a ceremony up at Standing Rock. It was very moving. Shortly thereafter, the chairman of that tribe issued a blistering statement in response to Trump and said, you want to build a fence? while our 75 miles along the border will have no fence. No way, no way. So when you think about it, that internal struggle around solidarity with Standing Rock between nations, and then an understanding by the chairman and the leadership there that there are big issues that you have to keep responding to outside your nation. It's not just about me and the small circle of we, but it's how you build out from there to form kind of an asymmetrical movement building that we're not used to doing. We would rather have the glorious thing of like, yeah, I was there when there were rubber bullets shot, or, you know, I was at Standing Rock, here's my selfie. But we need that other deeper relationship building and asymmetrical movement building now in a time like this.
Thank you. So we're at time, but we had 2 questions. And if people are willing to stay on just 5 more minutes, we can do 2 questions and then close up. Does that work for people? Okay. One question we had from Vanessa, where did it go? Vanessa's question was, how to bring this strategy of love and honoring community to actionable steps that can be presented on a larger scale via artistic events and public gatherings. Would any of the panelists like to respond to that?
I can jump in on that. One thing I just want to say, I think maybe this will bridge between the 2 pieces, is the piece on solidarity. I also think really is internal to our movements and internal to ourselves. One thing I've been really intensely trying to practice is how do we claim our whole complexity inside of ourselves and make more room for contradictions inside of ourselves? Because I think that when we don't allow that, then we don't allow other people to have any contradictions. And then we spend an immense amount of time, maybe more time than we spend fighting our opposition, we spend fighting each other inside of movement spaces and trying to tell each other, here's the right analysis, here's the right way. And I really feel like lately I've been like, how do we relinquish the right-wrong paradigm and instead shift into like, we have survived, we are learning, and we have agency over what our next steps are. And each person has that agency. So if you and I don't agree on exactly how to move forward, it's like, I have agency to be like, cool, you go do that, and I'm gonna do this over here, and create more possibilities instead of narrowing. And I think, Vanessa, to your point, like that is what will actually allow us to have actionable steps together, because I think what happens now is instead of being able to move to that actionable step, we move into internal critique, cross-movement critique, we move into these spaces where we make ourselves very small. We know how to deconstruct, and we are the best at deconstructing, and we can tell you all about what's wrong. But how do we look at something and say, oh, wow, I didn't think of that. That's amazing. What can I learn from that? And that might not be my path, but like, good job, great. And I will support yours and you support mine. And we actually do need to be able to get more comfortable with complexity and more comfortable with difference. And actually embrace difference, like biodiversity of concepts and ideas, and to say like, in order to be in right relationship with the planet, we have to be in right relationship with each other. And that we don't get there by subtweeting or Facebook, whatever, shade. We get there by being like, how can I affirm and uplift and affirm and uplift and affirm and uplift? And so really one of my challenges to people has been like, in any public space you're in, are you using that time to tear down or to build up? And really start to, even if you don't go 100%, shift, really start to notice, like, of the times that I'm posting, of the times that I'm speaking in public, of the times that I'm teaching children, of the times that I have the stage, whatever it is, am I using that as a time to uplift and to love, to be loving up some movement, loving up something that I think is a functional solution. So I just want to, that's something I feel like is so important right now.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to end with one last question, and this is from Lorena. What are some ways to change daily habits of resistance in conversations we know will be hostile with practices of love?
Begin by listening.
Begin by listening, says Adrienne. Any thoughts?
I think just a brief thing that I would add is understanding that, you know, our humanity is so misshapen by the systems of oppression that exist around us. And so I think, you know, when we're encountering people that have very, very inhumane views, or people, you know, that we're just maybe aren't that extreme, just kind of we're struggling with differences with, understanding that it's our world, our systems of oppression make it very difficult to be human. And it's really, we really do just have to struggle together. Again, that doesn't mean that, you know, I ignore, you know, sort of the actual threats that somebody presents to our very existence, to our very being, but that our struggles, our movements are also about just sort of an effort to really become fully human on an individual basis and on a collective basis.
Thank you. Beautiful advice. So we've gone over, I think this was, I know I want to look back over the video and the notes and take in everything. Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Ahmed. And thank you, Judith, for your presentations. Thank you, everyone out there who listened and gave questions and gave comments and just sent in your love. And we hope there's been several comments about hoping that this is an ongoing dialogue and conversation, and we hope to do that, and we have a commitment to doing that as well. And our pledge through Lead with Love was to take bold action grounded in love, and we're going to continue to do that and to continue to build a community from which that spirit emanates out. So thank you, everyone. We're going to close now. And
thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you for the invite.
Thanks for this work.
Honor.
For inviting us.
Thank you. And we'll all be in touch. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.